Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm Barbara Bell. I'm going to give a very brief introduction to Fred because Fred is known to a great many people in the community. He's very active in a number of groups. I got to know him on the Climate Crisis Committee, where he was such a great help. His background is in the yearbook, and I like to add on that I think Fred is an engineer, even though he doesn't have an engineering degree. He's many times acts as an engineer, and that's part of what he'll be talking about today when we hear about stormwater runoff and rain gardens and such. So that's my introduction. I would like to say one more thing before we get to Fred's talk, which is that this is the last winter-spring series of programs. We won't be having another program until October. In September, however, we have the field trip for members of the Garden Club. And we're having that this year to a town called Sullivan, which is just northeast of Ellsworth. So that's going to be a ways away, but it's going to be an interesting trip to the Granite Garden. And you can all be imagining what that might be in anticipation of September. So after this, the summer, in terms of the Garden Club calendar, the summer begins. We have to get ready for the plant sale and so forth. With that, Fred, your turn.
Thank you, Barbara. And everyone can hear me just fine, I hope. Good, good. And we're doing a Zoom too. So when I was asked to do this by Barbara, which is very kind of her, I thought, well, gee, you know, I can teach this the way that they would teach you if you were in an extension course or something like that. But no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how I have done it and using all those same thinking processes. And so this, I'm Fred Bowers. I'm a soil scientist. I got a Ph.D. in forest soils from the University of Washington. And also, I went to Rutgers University and had a master's degree in agronomy and soils, mostly soils, but a lot of agronomy too. So when I went to University of Washington, I learned a great deal about geomorphology and forest soils, which are very complicated. They're like rain gardens. So that's how I'm going to explain this to everybody. So that is, by the way, that was my garden in Princeton, New Jersey.
Last year,
you can do it here. It's a little warmer there, obviously. So I have to give you this, though. What is a rain garden? And a rain garden is a managed depression in the land that you can use to capture water
wherever they go and come back.
And it's meant to be good for the environment. It's not supposed to be a swamp or a mosquito haven or any of those things. It provides the conditions for nurturing hydrophilic, water tolerant plants. Filters out nutrients, pollutants, and sediment. So it stops erosion to a great extent. That also means, though, that occasionally you have to clean them out a little bit, depending upon where you put them, so that they don't become filled with sediment. But one of the most important parts of this is that they recharge groundwater. So this is water that you can capture from your roof or from someplace on your property or on someone else's property if they're going onto yours. But it recharges the groundwater table, which is so important. Plus, it keeps it from getting into the storm sewer system. And then that alleviates erosion down at the beach. So they're very important. It creates habitat. The kind of plants that you can plant there are ones that attract butterflies and bees and so on. And the other thing, this is really important. Basically what these are small versions of detention basins. Now, detention basins are something that the EPA requires for any construction or disturbance of soils that is larger than a certain area. And so the US EPA came up with really lot of guidance on how to deal with runoff from stormwater. So you can always find that. And in fact, in the back, there are some QR codes that you can, excuse me, that you can copy with your phone. And it links to these, some of the stuff that I'm showing you today. Now, I threw this in. I went over to the Hutchinson Center the other day and I took a photograph. This is one of their detention basins. Now, these were required because they disturbed a lot of land when they built that. However, they haven't really maintained this thing particularly, but it is, you know, look at it. There's a whole little ecosystem associated with this. And I'm thinking, well, you know, they could do more with this. This could be something of real value. I'm pretty sure it's the kind of thing where the like ducks would go here, turtles would live here. There, you know, so it's got an ecosystem that's valuable. And here is a picture that I took out of that website, My Watersheds, which is one that's on the QR codes thing. And I'll get back to that a little bit later. But basically, what a rain garden is if you think of it in your backyard, you can keep it real simple and just capture everything that comes off your roof and send it into a place on your property. Now, that place has to be a depression. So you have to either dig it out, or else, if you're lucky, you already have one, I suppose. But because digging, I'm getting old, and digging is not nearly as much fun as it used to be. But you know, you have to do it. And so this is a simple little diagram that shows possibilities. And so in this case, and this is where I'll start with. In this case, really all you need to do is calculate how much runoff you get from your roof and from associated areas. And that's actually easy enough if you do the math. So that's what you have to do. You have to capture your water, and you have to figure out how much water you have to deal with. You need to make sure that your rain garden depression is large enough to hold that water for however long you want it. However, you don't want it to become a pond. So that's the trick. So you have to think about your soil drainage rate, which I got thinking about it. You know, I used to work down in Ocean County, New Jersey sometimes. It's all sand, beautiful, perfect sand, the kind you can make concrete with. Well, we don't have a whole lot of that here in Belfast. Instead, what we have is bedrock, you know, hard pan layers, clay, you name it. And also another thing I want to add, this is very important. You have to keep in mind urbanization has taken place practically everywhere where there's a town today. So that means that people have come in for 100 years, 200 years, taken off the topsoil, eroded the topsoil. You know, kids play, things happen, you know, vehicles go over it, it gets compacted. Compacted soil is always less permeable and less conductive to water than the original forest soil that we would have had here hundreds of years ago. Then you have evapotranspiration. You really can't count that in too much in a small rain garden, but it does happen, and it's a good thing. So it's water that instead of going downstream and causing erosion problems somewhere else, it goes up into the atmosphere, and that's a good thing. So now, other thing, you have to find some plant species that are appropriate for your particular soil condition. And what I'm really trying to get at that is the seasonal high water table. And if you don't know what that is, you can look it up on the internet. Basically, what it means is that sometimes during the year, the water table builds up. It's either perched, which means there's a layer here that won't let water go down, or else that water comes up from the bottom and saturates a zone. And that's an important consideration for anything that is a crop or any plant. That's where you get sedges. We were over at Moose Point just the other day, and wherever there's really wet spots, there's wild sedges growing. Where it's not wet, you have grasses. They have different needs. So I recommend if you build something around on a hill or here, you might have to consider an outlet of some sort. There are outlets, for example, in those detention basins that I showed you earlier on, because otherwise it would overflow and then it would erode the berm, which you don't want that to happen. So that's how does a rain garden work in simple terms. So my first experience with this was when I lived in Princeton, New Jersey. We bought this house, a lovely house, and in the backyard, there was a, well, I show you this because there's the rain garden. Looking from in the backyard, I had a patio, and that's where I would sit, hang out under the tree in the shade, and look at the house and watch the birds. So, but this is what it looked like if you turned yourself around and looked. Here's what we ran up against. When we moved in here, the folks who lived here before tried to grow grass, turf grass. Well, there was so much shade. There was a huge oak tree. There's a sycamore tree here. There were, just everything under the sun. And there was mostly shade. And no matter what you did, and there was also compacted, because this property had been a farm that then turned into a suburban development in 1945, I think. And then all the kids in the world who played back there, and there was a swing set right here. So the kids would be out there playing, and it made it virtually impossible to grow grass because of shade and also compaction. But also the water did not soak into the ground here. So what I did is watched it. I had my rain gutters going out there, which that's where they had to go. And I watched what happened during big storms. And so the water would come out of the rain gutter, which I don't show you in this picture, but say here, and it would come through there. And so I followed the little stream, you might say. It was a stream, trust me. There were times when it really was. So I watched it, and then I said, oh, I think we could do this. Well, of course, that's where the swing set was, where they had a big concrete thing that I had to dig out. That's when I used to dig. But that took some doing, but we got that out of there. And then I dug this down, and I didn't know how deep to go because, I hadn't really thought of it quite, but you could only go so deep there because in Princeton, there is a shale Lockatong argillite formation about 2.5, 3 feet below the ground surface. Well, you can't do anything with that. You have to live with it. You can't dig it out. You can't do anything. And certainly by hand, you can't. So I watched it. And the reason this picture is so cool is because after we had a kind of a smallish storm, but it was still a storm, after I had dug this part out, it was still damp a couple days afterward. So it really shows you the difference between the dry area, on this side, and then where it was depression and a little damper. And I'm going to show you this too, because I'll never have another chance. If you see right there, right here, there's a pipe. Because once I built this, I realized it overflowed and it went that way because it was a slight, 1 or 2% slope. So I put a pipe in here and I made a little bridge, I guess you could call it. And then I realized that even that was water that I could take advantage of. So I dug a trench over here, put a pipe in there to go to this dogwood tree that I planted. And I created a little berm around the dogwood tree, and I directed the water that ran from here across the bridge and into there. So I was watering my dogwood tree. And if all else failed, I had another overflow that went behind the shed here. And that would capture whatever I couldn't capture before. Because it was just that when we had storms there, I mean, intensity of storms there, that's why when I came to Belfast, Mike Hurley said, oh, could we have intense storms here in Maine? I'm like, yeah, because we had plenty of them in New Jersey, and that's the same issue. So anyway, I tried to not send it to my neighbor. That was my objective. It really was. It wasn't to get rid of it. It was, I didn't want to send it to my neighbor and cause them troubles. However, the storms were so intense, I'll tell you, you could, I don't know, what can you do? When I wasn't a very big lot. It was, about 1/8 of an acre lot. So I did my best. It was really fun. And you can see my wife, Nina, she had all the plants ready to go. And she's probably said, Fred, you got to dig the holes. So anyway, so here are the plants that we started with. And hostas grow really well there in the shade. So that was really great. So here is what it looked like about a year or so later. So if we go back here, right where that is, that's what it looked like afterwards. So there's the ornamental grasses and hostas and you name it. We had a lot of azaleas too. They were really great. And the birds loved this place. And in fact, at the bottom of, I don't have a picture of it, but at the very bottom of this, I went out into the forest and I found a piece of wood that was covered with moss. And it was so pretty, the green color. It's like if you go to Moose Point, you see these. And so I put one of those down in the very bottom part of that thing. And it was always green. So in other words, my thing was working. It was causing water to stay there and to basically go into the groundwater table. So we had fun with that. And so that's the rain garden. Doesn't look like much really, does it? But that's okay because it served its purpose. What it's trying to do is capture water and recharge the groundwater table. And I didn't have a lot of pollution coming off my roof, I guess, but still think of it in the bigger term. That's what we were doing. So now I live in Belfast, and we're going to do a rain garden here, and I'll show you what I'm thinking. And that's a photograph out from my top window. And what's interesting about this is that that little tree is still there. And I don't know what kind of pine, it's some special thing. It's really pretty. Anyway, the proposed rain garden is here, and I'll show you a lot of pictures about it. This tree, Norway maple, was there. They had to cut it down. It got knocked over in a storm once, broke off a piece. And also, finally, it was just time for it to go. And the neighbor had to get rid of that. So he was fortunate enough to get to pay for that, and not I. But what's really amazing about it is, you know, you remove a tree and all the water that was being sucked up by that tree is no longer doing that. So now we get a lot more artesian water essentially, and I'll be showing you the problem with that. And this is, okay, like if you go there and you look to the left, that's what it looks like. And that's all the property we have, which more than enough. Whoops, really. And there's an old fence that was there when we moved in. And if you go over to a Viking, they still sell that locust wood. Makes great little fences. In fact, our neighbor up here was like, "Oh, that's the most beautiful fence." We're like, "Well, that's cool because, you know, it was what was here and it's still there." I mean, that must have been there for 80 years or something. Anyway, so here what I have, you know, because this ultimately goes to the street from over here, but what I did is I dug a trench that's, you know, something like a foot or a foot and a half deep. Once again, digging, and then I put those flat stones over it so you didn't fall in a hole. And then if you go here and hurt yourself, then we're going to start to see what it really looks like. And here is the proto rain garden that I'm working with. And here is where the tree no longer exists. And here is water that you can see. I don't know that it didn't come off of my roof, I'll tell you that. It probably seeped out from the ground. So essentially I have an artesian condition here to deal with. It's a little different than what you might think of as a rain garden, but heck, why not? It's water and we can use it to grow various vegetation. And once again, grass grows here, but well, this is, you know, dog damage, I guess you could say. But you know, I really don't like to mow lawns, by the way. My mother used to have about 2 or 3 acres that I had to mow every week. And I was like, "Mom, why are we doing this?" "Oh, I like it that way." Well, I don't. So I don't mow lawns. This is great for me. I have a very small electric lawnmower and it takes me 10 minutes to mow the lawn. I'm thrilled. So there we go. And so the important part of this is understand the lay of the land. You have to look at it. I mean, nobody's going to give you an easy way to measure the slope. You'll have to really think about it. Although with our iPhones now, there's an awfully lot you can do. And I'll talk about that as we go on. It has, you know, it has a little compass and it has a little slope meter so you can figure out your slopes and see which way things are going. And but really that's the trick. Look at it like, I can do that. I have experience doing it. You can all do it. It's just common sense. And here, then the next thing you really need to do is figure out how much water you're going to have to deal with before you start digging. And if you go to that QR code on the one that's, well, I can actually show you this, I think. Hopefully I won't get crashed. Here we go. That's this site. Oh, for some reason that doesn't show up. Guess that's my own fault. Hold on. That's okay. If you click on that, what it does is you can slide this little bar across here. Let's say you have a 2-inch storm you're trying to design for. You just slide that across, and if you have a 2-inch storm, you're going to get, you know, 800 or 900 gallons of water coming off of your roof. So all you have to do is put in your square footage of roof, see, and then do that, and that'll tell you how many gallons you have to get rid of. Now, I put this in because how many, you know, everybody also talks about rain barrels as a solution. Well, a rain barrel is 55 gallons at best. How many rain gallons do rain barrels do you need to deal with 800 gallons? I mean, that's the trick. You really kind of can't do it. So that's where it comes in. If you have the property, you can do a rain garden instead. And you can still have one of these or two or three because they're really nice. They're going to be nice, clean, clear water that you don't have to fight to find and get. And it can be really useful. So I would recommend putting a few of those in too, if you can. But you can never capture that much. I forget what I mean, do the math. It's a lot, believe me. And they're expensive too. So it's almost a joke, I guess. They used to have a lot of the parties. I mean, it's a good thing because it makes people think. Capture water. Don't just send it down to the street and send it away. Water is such a precious resource. There we go. There we go. Okay, so here we go again. I've been working with this. I had to move these stones around. They were actually buried in here. The previous owners used this area as a patio because the tree was there and it was great. They had a hammock in the shade. It was wonderful. However, these stones, they're huge. They're like 300 pounds each. And this one particularly. And so over the years, because it was wet and soupy, they sunk in and there was filter fabric beneath them. I didn't know that till I started digging. And then I mean, my biggest challenge was to get rid of filter fabric at one point. But so I cleared this area and this is just gravel. They put nice little pea gravel in there. So it's pretty good. Once I get rid of the filter fabric, it was easy streeting away. So next, now you have to figure out your area of the rain garden. Many times you're constrained by the fact that you only own so much property or whatever. So this is pretty rough and ready. I just did a rectangle and a triangle and estimated it. Well, then I discovered, and I'll show you later, LiDAR, your iPhones and all those things do LiDAR, and it's really amazing because they can actually, you can make little dots like here, 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 here. And what it does is it shows you the actual area very precisely almost. And it almost can show you, because it does look at a little bit at the actual size volume, but you can do that with your iPhone or something. So in this case, I also figured, well, I had to go down, say, about a foot from the stones that these flagstones, I guess you call them, at this point. So I got about a foot there. So I said, okay, that's my cubic feet volume. And essentially that's how you figure out how much water can go into that. So this, you look it up, all you have to do 7.48 gallons per cubic foot. So you just do the math and that's what you can deal with. Anything more than that, you either have to send it somewhere else or you have to have an outlet. So in this case, I had no choice because I'm also getting artesian water, so I have to have an outlet. And here's actually my, this was below near the street more, and I had a guy come over and build me a new driveway, and he went down all the way to the water table, to the clayish layer, and here's where the seepage is coming out. So this is what we call a seasonal perched water table, essentially, and So we got down to that layer, and then he built up about 2 feet or so with gravel and built a driveway for me. So let me see what else I can say. So you basically you should know your hydraulic conductivity. In other words, the rate that water will go into this restrictive zone. Well, this restrictive zone, it's pretty slow. So I'd say less than 0.2 inches per hour. You know, and the way to really figure that out is I have 2 ways to do it. One, you can go to this web soil survey, and that's one of the QR codes that is back on those pages. And then here, 1 gallon of water comes out to be 0.6 inches per square foot. So if you have a 0.2 of an inch an hour, you can see it would take at least 3 hours to get rid of 1 gallon on 1 square foot. That's the kind of thing you have to think out. Okay. Any questions on that? That's all the math pretty much I'm going to do. Okay. So now visualize the whole hydrologic system that you're dealing with. And, you know, this is how I look at it. You don't have to do this, but I do this. This is how I think. So in my case, if we were to look at it, you have artesian water coming in from underneath that old tree, right? And that's constantly there. That is what I would call the seasonal high water table. It's because it's not always there. In the summertime, there's not much coming out of that. And then if you were able to channel the roof runoff, that's your runoff. You have direct precipitation. So if you get 2 inches of rain, 2 inches of rain goes into your rain garden. And then you get a little evapotranspiration, which you really could just about forget about in terms of your design. However, this is what really happens. That's what I'm trying to say. And then you also get infiltration. Well, at 0.2 inches an hour, maybe, if you're lucky. So that's how you look at this. And then here I mean, this is not I'm no artist, as you can imagine, but basically here's your rain garden with a little berm. And then here's my outlet, okay? Okay, so here again is a little more of a close-up view of this thing. And you can see the pea gravel. This is going to be nice to work with. I haven't done this yet. This is all in my mind, and I'm going to do it this summer, I hope. And then the LiDAR, this is a LiDAR picture that I did with my iPhone to show this exact thing. And if you do one of these, they're fun to play with because you can actually sort of grab it here and move it around in 3 dimensions. And you can see it from different points of view. And it helps to visualize, you know, the whole picture. So that's what I have in store for me this summer, I think. And looking downhill, so here's my outlet that will go to the street through that little pathway little trench that I dug. And here is what it looks like at the street. Right now it's still running from the storms that we've had. And it's mostly groundwater that is just seeping into my trench and drainage system. What I would like to do is build this sort of thing. So here would be my rain garden that I showed you. Figure there's not going to be tons of infiltration. So I'm thinking it would be really fun to have a little cistern of some sort that holds water in addition to what the soil will hold. And then I can control how much water stays in my rain garden too. If I want more, because in the summer, maybe you want more. So that's my general plan. And I think I know. You can buy these at Home Depot. These are really good. I put one of these when I had the Princeton project. The good thing about this is that you don't fall in a hole. And you can take this little lid right off here and you can go in there and, you know, scoop out a couple of gallons of water from time to time. And meanwhile, it has an inlet and an outlet. They don't cost much. They're really a good thing to do if you're going to have an outlet. And then what I was trying to show here, and I'm still, you know, you can play with, you're going to have some, maybe an indentation here, a little deeper area. That won't grow tomatoes, but maybe up on the side I can grow tomatoes. So that's what I'm thinking. And here's another profile. And so you really need to, so here's ground level where the tree is. Then my high water table, my outlet, and this is the real critical thing when it comes to growing plants, is your soil depth. So in here, the depth to the seasonal high water table may only be a few inches. However, you can control that with your drainage, but still, it's going to be a little wet in there many times of the year. On the other hand, up here, well, it depends on how deep you dig this, right? So, but let's say it's 2 feet or something. 2 feet above a seasonal high water table, you can grow pretty much anything you want, especially if you have some drainage. Let me tell you about seasonal high water table real quick, because the thing is, water itself is not the enemy. It's when it stands and it becomes stagnant, what happens is it turns into, instead of an oxygen-rich environment, it becomes anaerobic. And that's the whole problem with the seasonal high water table, really. You can have, you know, irrigation water, for example, plants like that. They don't like it to be stagnant anaerobic water, though. And so irrigation water has lots of oxygen in it. That's an important point when it comes to your planting. So here is something else that's on the QR codes in the back, that this comes from University of Maine guidance, and they show how you do it. This is the illustrations. I have a feeling the person who did this may have been in a real hurry to do it, but they did a nice job drawing the berm, here's the swale from the roof, top runoff, and so on. And a nice little drawing here. Permeable mix. I think I'm going to use sand for the most part. It's easier to deal with. And plus, there's so much water here, and you can always add mulch and beef up your sand mix. So you don't have to go and look for really expensive topsoil. I don't think you do here. It's just not that necessary. Some places, yeah. Okay, so anyway, you can see, okay, what did they do? Oh, they did this too. See, they show the water table, and oh, that's the grade. And then this is the distance. So anyway, this is easy. You just download it, and it's got a good site there. So here they also, in that same document, they tell you the potential plants that you can grow in here, in that little garden. So there's the pipe, there's the rock, the swale. So, you know, I don't know all these plants, but oops. So anyway, the important thing is, here's the water molecules. It's a GIF spinning around. We forget about it. That's all it is. Everything else, I had one of my bosses when I worked at New Jersey DEP, is like, water is just that, everything else is kind of a pollutant in a sense, especially if it's sodium or, that's one we have to worry about, sodium chloride. In New Jersey and here too, PFASs, you have everything. So the water molecules, we love the water molecule, let's face it. And that's the one that controls all of the processes. So basically, think about your needs. How much depth do you need to a water table? And sun and shade, sensitivity to salts, and competition from tree roots. That's another thing. When I had that tree there in the backyard, no matter what you did, if you dug a hole, you always ran into a root. Well, the roots are starting to die off, thankfully. So, but they suck up a lot of moisture and also a lot of nitrogen and nutrients of all sorts. So you're constantly battling trees when you're trying to grow plants like flowers. Now, I alluded to how do you actually figure out your infiltration if you need to. I don't really think you need too much here. You can always expect there to be, am I wrong? You're going to find a rock in Belfast, at least. I always find rocks or something, or a layer that's really pretty impermeable. But if you do need to do that, the way that you can do it, it's pretty much like the way if you were building a septic system. You do a perk test. So what you would do is dig a hole and pour water in it, saturate it, saturate it, saturate it. When you think it's saturated enough, maybe 5 buckets of water, let it soak in. Then you put another volume of water in it and a little yardstick or something and measure how fast it takes for the water to seep into the ground. Because if you do it in a way that's saturated, the water will go down, not out to the sides. And that's really critical. If you don't saturate it first, a lot of water just goes to the sides because water has the ability to suck. Soils have the ability to suck the water outward, just the same way they do downward, only just a little different because you have gravity downward. Sideways, you don't. But the whole trick to these rain gardens is that what goes in has to go out, or else you'll overflow and have a pond, which I don't think we really want. So that kind of brings me to the end of the prepared talk. Keep in mind, it's all about, one thing about water is it works the way we think it works. You get precipitation and runoff and groundwater infiltration and runoff. And there's also, fortunately, soils store water that your plants can get because they have enough power from the sun to pull water from the soil. So that's your hydrologic model, and that's the way I'm thinking through this process. I think that's really all I had, unless, that's really it. So let me see. I'll go back, show you a pretty picture. So if you have questions, ask away. I like this one.
The questions have to be on the microphone.
Thanks. Hi, Fred. So am I right in thinking that if I've got an area in my yard that is my yard is full of a lot of clay, and if I've got an area where I currently have sitting water in a low patch, like it's almost a vernal pool, that's not a spot for a rain garden because it's not draining?
Right. It's probably not draining. Either that or it's a place where all the water is being channeled. that is where you have to do the lay of the land trick and look at it and see what happens. Does it ever dry out?
Maybe in the height of summer.
So there again, if you dig a hole that's like this deep, you might find why it's not draining. I know. We need young people that like to dig. That's what I'd say, right?
I can talk loud, but. Oh, for the system. My understanding is that our water table in Belfast, at least in downtown Belfast, is pretty darn high. And that the vast majority of homeowners that I know, we all have sump pumps. And those sump pumps typically go into our drainage, our city drainage. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is there something else we can do with our sump pump water, or should we all just be, is that just where it needs to go?
Yeah, actually, I lived with sump pumps. Trust me, my mother had sump pumps. We had to have 3 pumps sometimes. Same kind of problem. Here's the trick. When you have a sump pump, that's just groundwater. Hopefully, hopefully that's all it is. So let's say it's just plain old groundwater. What you need to do is make sure it goes far enough away from your house that it doesn't just come right back in. So that's one thing. The second thing is it is clean water. It's clean water. So all you'd have to do is build some sort of a device to capture that and let it soak in. And you'd be doing a favor for the entire storm system in Belfast to do that. If everybody did that, we'd have much, much less water running out of these huge culverts down by the bay.
Can you talk just a little bit about the impact of that?
Of the
amount of water that goes into the bay, like why we would want.
Well, it's
to
not
try
hurting
and-
the bay so much as it is causing, well, there's 2 things. I mean, when we were with the Climate Crisis Committee, we really looked into that. The first thing is that it's water that's being wasted essentially by just shooting right down the hill into the bay. Secondly, it causes constant beach erosion. Every time at Allen Street, I've watched it where the water is pouring out. I mean, and you could play with the math on that. It comes out 10 feet sometimes, and there's a lot of power behind that. And it causes erosion of the beach. And then with the storms that we've been having where the tide is really high, the tide actually now is possible that it can reach the culverts that are there, which, think about that. All this water is coming from up the hill here. And where is it going to go? Well, it's going to run into the ocean with the culvert. It's not going to even have a chance to go out into the bay. It's going to be plugged up essentially by the ocean. So then that can start to back up, you might say, to the people who live closer to that bay. That's the way I see it. And I've actually witnessed that down here at the boathouse where the manholes, when there's the waves are coming in, the manholes are going like boom, 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 they're moving. So that pressure is pushing them up. And so as sea level rises, it'll just get worse.
So aside from hating to mow grass, in the period that we're getting into, we have intense storms separated by periods of drought. Grass is our enemy, right? Because it a nice look, to the degree that the lawn looks nice, it rejects rapid downpours and becomes just another source of runoff. So I think there ought to be a state statute against lawns.
Well, yeah, if you have to mow them, I would definitely agree. Lawns are not a particularly good infiltration medium.
So I just want to say in response to who can you talk to and what can you do about that problem? it's a long-term problem as far as the runoff goes. And what it means is creating permeable sidewalks and permeable pathways so the water falls and goes into the ground where it is. That's a long-term planning situation, and it's one that any town, but any town along the water or any town like Belfast that's on a hill really needs to start now and implement as time comes forward, because as we've seen, water runoff is going to be much greater in the future than it is right now. It's not going to suddenly get better.
A couple of things. I was walking my dogs this morning and we've been watching them rebuild the boardwalk. And I overheard them say that the tide has been up to like 12.5 feet. And they're dealing with that as they're bringing in these manufactured timbers that take 2 guys to haul. So that's one thing. They said when they started, it was 6 feet, but now it's up to 12.5. I'm curious about the soil thing. I built rain gardens in another area, and I took them, like that diagram said, down to 2 feet, and then did a whole soil mixture for retaining water, with the idea that it had to drain within 48 hours. And I'm guessing that's what you're going for here as well.
Yeah, my problem, as you could see, is that I have artesian water coming
Right.
in. And so I may never be able to really deal with that other
that.
than to have an outlet.
Yeah.
yeah.
So my yard has been flooded now for the last 2 months.
Right.
You know, and I did some trenching and that helped a little bit. But I'm wondering if what I need to do then is what you're doing, some rain gardens with some permeable pipe that puts it into like the gullies that are there.
Well, what I probably didn't emphasize is that if you do have the right soil mix, you dig your depression and fill it with soil that will absorb the water and hold on to it.
Uh-huh.
You might have to buy topsoil. It might have to have some clay in it.
Right.
Certainly compost, because compost, organic matter will hold quite a bit of water. So, in other words, you can improve your problem. You may not be able to completely solve it.
Yeah, definitely compost. I mean, that was
Right.
the soil mix we had was like some sand,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe a third to a half sand, some really nice soil, and then at least 30% compost. So it was a little pricey, but
Oh, yeah.
definitely worked. So yeah, I'm curious. I don't want to, I'm like you, I need somebody to dig it for me.
Jeez.
I'm old.
Questions or comments?
Well, don't be afraid to do it. It's actually pretty simple, and I'm here if you ever need a little advice, and Barbara knows how to get hold of me easily.
Well, thank you very much, Fred. It was a fascinating talk. And don't you have a son who could dig for you?
He seems to work too much, and then he's tired. He doesn't want to dig, but
That's the problem. But thank you very much.